Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for another installment of Pod Gaming's Blake or No! Alright folks, here are the rules. Each episode, your hosts Marshall and Shawn will discuss a certain aspect of video gaming. Each host will present their case for whether or not the trope is a good idea. Take it away, Marshall and Shawn!
Welcome to the next installment of Philosophy of Gaming. Today's blank or no topic is movie adaptations or no, and as you can tell, we have a guest with us. This is Eric. He is our very talented editor, and as it turns out, this topic for this video was actually his brainchild. So Eric, tell us what we're talking about today.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. This is quite a treat. I was just like, I'm like here, and I'm like, yeah, we're doing this.
This man drove 25 hours to see us.
More like 6, but I appreciate
65.
Okay, that's a little too much. Anyways, so for this adaptation, so we should probably clarify what we're talking about here. So we're talking about adaptations or no. For this case, we're talking about movie adaptations of video games for the purposes of POG. Because overall, generally speaking, adaptations work. So the answer would be yes. For the purposes, like I said, it's video games. Because
now, real quick, when we talk about adaptations, are you talking about movies that have been made into games or vice versa or both?
More like video games that have been made into movies.
No, both.
I think, yeah.
Both.
Let's make both the topic.
Do you want to do both?
Yeah.
Because overall speaking, like the general thing is like they do work. Adaptations do work. We've seen it multiple times. Mm-hmm. You've seen plenty of movies that are based off of novels and comic books. Like, for example, like Harry Potter, James Bond. Those are like very successful franchises based off a series of novels. Obviously,
Spider-Man off of
a
DC,
comic book
series.
Comic
Most
books specifically, specifically, yeah, of course. So this is where video games kind of go a little bit blurry because for the most part, when trying to adapt something like a video game to the big screen, that's where it kind of falters. And I think the reason why it falters is because the truth of the matter is like video games have come a very long way. Like video games used to go from like 8-bit to 16-bit. Then we went to polygons, and now we got into full-blown CGI. And also, like gameplay has definitely evolved too. But then you also have to remember how like it used to be no story whatsoever in a video game. You'd just be like, we're just going to do this, and that's your objective. You beat in the game. Hooray. No story. Great. Then you get to like the PlayStation era, or basically the 3D era of video games, and then the opportunities are endless. Now you can like fully tell like a full-blown story with a video game. Like the best known example of like a great story in a video game is the Metal Gear franchise. Like those games have really upscaled like how to really tell a video game story as well as execute.
Have they made those into movies though? I'm not aware if they have.
So they're working on creating a movie for Metal Gear. I forget the director's name, but I know that Oscar Isaac is supposed to play Solid Snake at some point. But so Metal Gear is my all-time favorite gaming franchise, and like I'm very much looking forward to this. However, given the track record so far of a lot of video game adaptations, I'm a little bit iffy on it because for the most part, when you adapt a video game into a movie, it's basically you're just basically watching a giant cutscene, but unfortunately some liberties have been taken because the studio wants to do something a little bit different. So that's where kind of the question really comes. So how do you properly execute an adaptation of a video game? And that's where we can kind of like split this discussion into like parts.
Let me tell you. What do you know of as an adaptation that is done well? The first things that come to mind for me, Pokemon, Resident Evil. What do those have in common? They're not based on the game. And this is the game to movie adaptation because the games came first.
Yeah.
But I think what they did well from game to movie is that they didn't follow the story. They have completely different stories. Now, would you guys want to see those follow the stories? Probably, but would they do well?
Hold on, though, because Pokemon, I think, is a little bit different. Pokemon had a TV show adaptation that did at least follow the sequence of the game, where Ash travels from town to town. It actually kind of is part of like the canon Pokemon Game Boy games.
Yep.
And then the movies were just kind of like almost season finales that they made at the end
in
of
a way.
each game.
In a way, I can concede that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just feel like the way that Pokemon has done has been great. I mean, I know these are kids movies, but they were done well. They worked for what they were. And the Resident Evil movies, I know you're going to have a lot to say about this because it's your favorite, but I think the Resident Evil movies are really good.
What did he say?
I've never played the games because I've never been good at
Okay,
them.
see, that's where you and I differ because I have never. I mean, like, I know basically almost like. It's like Resident Evil for me. It's like the Resident Evil for dummies. That's me. I'm a dummy. But even I'm like looking at the games and the movies, and I'm like, this is like two very different things.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and chime in since Resident Evil was brought up. Before I kind of get into that, I'm just going to say I'm a hard no on this topic, and I have a lot of reasons that we haven't even really got to yet. But one of the things I was contemplating was the question of, is it done well? You guys have brought up a couple of examples that kind of give me a little bit of a pause. Like, for example, Pokemon. I can appreciate what they did with that from the video games to the TV show to the movie, but it was pretty much an all-encompassing franchise where Pokemon basically was involved in developing every single bit of those. Enough said on that. This brings us to Resident Evil. The Resident Evil games are one of my favorite franchises in video games of all time. The stories are very good, very in-depth. It kind of gives you like this sense of this massive umbrella corporation that seems to have so much power that the heroes almost feel completely just swamped in the darkness of the zombies, but also swamped by the darkness of power that, say, the Umbrella Corporation had. The movies, I think, are pretty much garbage. Now, they're entertaining in kind of in Expendables or a Marvel movie sort of just action and explosions kind of a way. They're entertaining that you can sit down and watch them. But if you compare them to Resident Evil, they have nothing to do with the storyline. They basically just appropriate different characters, slap the Resident Evil label on the movies, and they are really just kind of mediocre sort of action movies. And the only reason why I think they're so enjoyable is because of some of the nostalgia characters and ideas from the original Resident Evil games. I don't think the movies were that well done. Even though I enjoy watching them, I would not put them... They're watchable, is what I would say about Resident Evil.
Okay.
Well, I think it's ironic that you're talking about Resident Evil because the director for those movies, Paul Wes Anderson, he is responsible for arguably one of the most successful video game adaptations, and that's the first Mortal Kombat, all the way back in 95. Now, it is a PG-13 movie. They did that because they want to get more seats in there. I mean, if you know anything about Mortal Kombat, one of the most violent video games out there. It is all about the fatalities. It's one of the reasons...
For its time. That's kind of arguable today.
It is. But it was very brutal for 1995.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is... Well, 92, but that's when
what
the first
I said.
Game, well, the first game came out in 92. Anyways, though, but Mortal Kombat is the reason we have the ESRB, or at least one of the first games to really have that rating system that we now have. But... So the movie, for the most part, the original one, pretty much follows the original game beat to beat. Outworld is invading Earth. They need to win 10 straight consecutive Mortal Kombat tournaments for Outworld to invade. But you have all of your Earthrealm warriors that are participating in the tournament. The fights are pretty awesome. And then you have the characters that are pretty spot on. Like it's nothing deep. It's nothing like that's going to change anything about the genre. But because of how well they adapted the characters, they adapted the story, and also don't forget that incredibly epic theme song that we can't play for copyright reasons. As a result, the movie works, and this is very interesting because 2 years later we got the sequel, Annihilation, and that's a piece of that's something I like to flush down the toilet. I'm just going to say that one.
I don't think I remember seeing Mortal Kombat as a kid. I don't remember really any much details about it. I do like the games a lot, and so I'm going to go ahead and take your word for it that the movie was good. That was also a different time, though, too. I think that back in the 90s, there were a lot of well-done movies, and I think that because of modern-day talent, there's significantly less of that in movies these days. I can grant you that maybe that wasn't one adaptation that did well, but I don't think that sways me in my overall opinion on the topic, which, like I said, I'll get into that.
I mean, there are a couple more that I can go into detail, but what are you going to say, Marshall?
I was going to say, I kind of agree with Shawn in the fact that there were a lot of movies that were really good in the 90s and even the early 2000s before CGI was huge, I think. And one of the biggest examples I think of is Lord of the Rings, like how they did it without so much CGI then. And then you look at the Hobbit trilogy that came out like 12 years later. And it can kind of be compared to the games, the opposite direction. Well, book, movie, and then games afterwards. But the games look incredible and they play really well. If you look at like Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, those are great games. They have a very different. They don't follow the story in the same fashion. There's the PS2 and Xbox games the original Xbox that follow the original movies, but. I think that those movies did really, really well as far as like how they captured what the books were talking about. And then the games did a pretty good job for what they were capable of the time. But, if you look forward to when they did the Hobbit movies, they didn't nearly do as well as they did with the Lord of the Rings, considering they were made 10, 12 years later. And the games that came out, like Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, they just felt, as much as they look incredible and they play well, they feel like they're lacking something huge. And I think it's the fact of that grand story. I think that's a big thing that they're lacking.
Yeah, I think when it comes to movies that have been turned into games, there might be a couple of franchises that are so big that it does work in that direction, meaning movies and then games. Lord of the Rings might be an example of that. Not a fan of it. Can't speak on it.
What's the other one you're not a fan of that you're going to say?
That's the next one I'm going to bring up.
Yeah, I bet it is.
Star Wars.
Yes, sir.
Right? So Star Wars, good movies, great movies. I don't like them. That's on me. Traitor! But I also know that a lot of the games that came out of Star Wars, like Battlefront, for example, I know there's a handful of others, very well received. I'll grant that. I think another example, one that I am a fan of, is Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park had a lot of good movies. I can't say that recently, but the originals are really good and the games are good, but the games were kind of interesting because those were more of like a sim type game, a tycoon type game where it's more of like a park builder rather than trying to like follow a story and run away from dinosaurs and stuff like that. Although there's some very, very old games like in the original Sega Genesis, like Lost World games that are kind of like that.
Yeah.
Ruh-roh.
Oh no.
In that direction, those are really the only ones that stand out. I could mention Spider-Man. I know a lot of people like Spider-Man. I have a big problem with Marvel these days anyways, but it seems like a lot of the movies that have been turned into video games are just very lackluster to me. I think a lot of them are actually made for like kids games anyways. Like a lot of like the big franchises become, say, like for example, Lego games. I know they're big and they're popular, but it's just kind of a little quirky arcade style game that's meant for kids.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I was actually going to comment on. If you've been following the channel since the beginning, one of the first videos we did was a Pokemon Lego Star Wars kind of like open review. It wasn't scripted or anything. And the new Lego Star Wars, it was good. It was a good game. I think the one thing that I really take away from it the most that I like is that it follows the movies. But it's done in such a fashion that it doesn't look incredible, and it's it's Lego.
It's a little bit more comical, that one.
It is. It's comical, but it really follows the movies, like almost like scene by scene. Like if you were skipping chapters on your DVD, like it really follows that kind of theme, and I think that it works really well. But it is comical, and it is not true to form. It is not Star Wars reinterpreted. I think Jedi Fallen Order is a better example of that, even though Jedi Fallen Order has no story that existed in a movie or TV show already. That one did a really good job, but I think it's just because it's graphically, fascinating.
I don't really count Star Wars, in my opinion, for adaptations or so, because a lot of these stories are just add-ons. When I think of like adaptations of like a movie,
you think it's gotta be
like a direct adaptation, so like
one for one, but obviously there are
not
differences,
exactly,
and that's what
because
we're
like
talking.
so one of my favorite games that I like to play when I was a kid that was Star Wars based was like the adaptation for Revenge of the Sith, which is basically kind of like just a go around hack and slash, kind of just like fighting.
That's what the
clones
Lord of the
and
Rings
Jedi.
ones were like too.
That to me is more of an like an adaptation
Because it took the actual movie.
Yeah, it took the actual movie.
It said play
and
the
just-
movie now.
Yeah, play the movie basically. Like we don't get those anymore now.
Yeah.
Most of those like adaptations go straight to like mobile, but like and see kids in those days, adaptations were great.
I also think that those, when you say that you get to play the movie, though, I even remember as a kid myself, it just felt like a lot of those fell short, too, for me.
You know what, too? I think that they may have fallen short, and that's true. And maybe that's part of the reason they stopped making them. But I think the biggest reason they stopped making them is because they are so far technologically. I mean, look at the Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars games. They were putting cutscenes in those from the actual movies.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so the spin-offs of the series that were TV show or movie end up being generally probably better because of the fact that they're not the mainline games. So they're better than the mainline, the mainline replay of all of Lord of the Rings. It's like, well, do you want to play that? Because I've seen the movies. I'd rather play something that showed me a story I did not know. You know?
I think that's a good tangent for me to kind of start shifting
Sure.
the topic a little bit, and this is where some of my criticisms are really going to start coming in. I think that when it comes to like movies being adapted into video games, I think that we generally, for the most part, kind of see eye to eye on all that between all three
I
of
think
us.
so. Yeah.
So I think that where the biggest point of contention is going to be where video games become adapted into movies. I have a very deep principled criticism of it, but before I get that, I have a practical one too, and here's what it is. Video games, especially a lot of the good story-based ones over the past, I don't know, I would say 10, maybe plus years or so, you cannot complete a story-based game in less than, say, 10 hours for a short game. And a movie is only 90 minutes, or a long movie could be like around 3 hours, right? So the movies have to make a lot of cuts that are critical for the story that's in a game. One example I can think of, and they didn't make this into a movie as far as I know, but like if they were to make a movie, say, about Final Fantasy X, they cannot compact that whole story into a hour and a half long film because the journey along the way and the way that the characters grow and that's crucial to the story. A movie just cannot capture that, so it's always going to fall short.
Yeah, at that point, it becomes a television series. That's kind of the best way to approach it. Although, to be honest, don't watch Halo because that is a horrible adaptation of Halo.
I've heard good things about it. So
I
I'm
have
curious.
not heard good things about Halo. I would rather not do that to myself.
But here's the thing, too, is that why do you need to use your time and double dip into a storyline that you already know and to experience it a different way? Especially if the storyline is experienced originally through a video game where you are the most immersed into the story by actually being one of the characters in it. And then you take that and turn it into a movie where now you just become a spectator of it. That's a lot less impactful emotionally on the story for the consumer.
So let's take something you obviously knew I was going to bring up at some point during this. The Warcraft games.
Insert the meme I'm about to post.
That told the story about, you know, the start from when the orcs came to Azeroth and invaded and how that process worked with the opening of the Dark Portal and all this stuff. These are in the Warcraft games. In World of Warcraft, this has already happened. And so, two different games. Warcraft is a real-time strategy game. When you take a real-time strategy game with so much lore backing it and make it into a movie, yeah, I think the movie itself was horrible. But the way they told the story was pretty good.
I watched it too. It was bad.
What I didn't like about the movie was the CGI, mainly. Almost more than anything else, the CGI was my problem.
But that's the thing that a lot of modern movies, that's the only thing they have going for them.
Yeah.
It's the bright flashing lights and the explosions.
The
and
spectacle
the
of it
epic
all.
scenes. That is what brings the moviegoers there to watch it. And they really just
Well,
suck at the story.
what's the most disappointing about this is that Blizzard has done a very good job making cinematic cutscenes for World of Warcraft. The ones that come out before each expansion, they're incredible. Then you go watch that movie, and it looks like they just threw everything they knew in the trash and started from scratch.
But you have to, though. That goes back to my point, is that there's too much story in a game like Warcraft, right? Where they have to either compact it into a short story, which in that case wouldn't work. So they kind of have to come up with their own story based off of it.
So, I mean, there is a movie that actually kind of fits kind of what you're talking about. However, it is unfortunately a failure of a movie. So, Assassin's Creed, when they made that movie, how that movie works is it actually takes place in the main continuity. What they did, though, is instead of just retelling the original story, what they did is they took just another character that just existed, never seen before within the universe itself. He is actually a descendant of one of the, I think, of the main character from Unity, that installment. And then from there, what they did was they just ran with that story. They created like a new form of the animus for that movie. To be fair, so I'll be honest, I haven't seen the movie really, but like this is kind of from what I know. It's very
Talking about
contradictory.
things that he has knowledge about.
This sounds very Resident Evil.
But the point is like that's an example of a movie where you're going where like if they're gonna tell a story, a video game adaptation or a story, just like set it within the main story, but just use different characters. Maybe you can bring in some other like characters that are from the games, but they're not, their appearance won't be consequential or whatnot. So you can do it, but just tell a good story on top of that too.
But Assassin's Creed, though, that's one of the relatively newer movies.
Yeah,
right?
that came up about 2016, I think.
Okay, so I think this is actually kind of a good thing for me to lead into my fundamental problem with the movie adaptations, especially with modern movies in general, but especially with adaptations. So I'm going to start from my main reason why I don't like it, and then I'm going to work backwards and explain why.
Sure.
I don't like movie adaptations because I think it is a sign of it's the death of art is what it is.
Whoa.
It is the death of art. This is a trend. I'm actually going to be writing a monologue to do a video on this exact topic, but using some examples here.
Okay, Uncle Jack.
Exactly. How do I put this? When art dies or is bad, that is a sign of a deteriorating culture. That's my fundamental problem with movie adaptations. And there's two reasons as to why. The first reason is that, and this is actually undisputable, because movie adaptations by their nature are not original. There's no originality whatsoever, is because they take a concept and then they produce it into something new. And to use a term that Marshall likes to use a lot, and I can't believe I'm going to agree with him with something like this, it is a cash grab. How can you make the most money off of this franchise?
I don't like the term.
And
it just is.
You use it, but
Yeah, I use it because it exists.
True.
I mean,
But
that's the most case for pretty much every adaptation. They are cash grabs.
They are, but what it also does is that it lacks originality in the sphere of art. There's not a lot of original type of movies that are being put out there these days that are really worth a crap. And the reason, now that is bad enough on its own. The second reason why I don't like it is because it is working.
Yeah.
The reason why it's working, and this is a problem with our generation, with the millennials.
Consumerism.
More than that, it's nostalgia. We
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
problem with nostalgia where all we do is we have so much brand loyalty. We just want to keep seeing the new best thing that comes out. An example for this that really hits home for me is Jurassic Park. Just talking about the movies for a second. They started off very good, and then over time they got worse and worse and worse. And then there's a good 13-year gap since they made any movies. Jurassic World came out, and it was good. But it was just good. Now, they've introduced a lot of nostalgic themes from the original Jurassic Park movie into it. That is an appropriate level of nostalgia for something like that. But then throughout the later movies, there's just no creativity, no originality. The writing was bad, and then it just died. But it only existed for the sake of nostalgia itself. The reason why I have a problem with nostalgia, and I think that a lot of people actually embrace it these days, I actually think it's a problem, especially for our generation. One of the reasons why is because nostalgia is something that we cling to as millennials that prevents us from growing up. We don't mature. In the proof of this is actually in the culture. Millennials, by average, don't make as much money for where we are at our age compared to previous generations. We're not having as much kids. We're not taking on as much responsibilities because we're just too damn afraid to grow up, and we cling to all of our consumer-based brands of nostalgia, and we just choose to live in the past. That is why this is doing so well, and our generation now coming up into like the, that age where we're the ones producing the art and the culture are falling way short on the things that we're producing. There is no original movies. Think about it. We talk about like the 90s and some of the area around there, even before. Movies like Top Gun, Shawshank, great original movies. Nothing like that has been produced for, I can't even remember the last really great movie that was made that was original. And all we have now is adaptations or sequels in like the stupid Marvel series. All it is these movies are commercials to sell action figures. That's why I have a problem with it.
Go off, Shawn.
Go
off. Let's go.
Basically,
I got very passionate about this.
I see that.
I'll tell you, I woke up this morning knowing that this was going to be a topic, and I didn't know which way I was going to lean. And then for about an hour of deep meditative thought, I realized just how strongly I felt. I have never felt more sure about a blank or no topic than this one for this reason, because I actually see it as a net bad. A net negative.
Well, I'm glad I brought it up. I'm glad I brought this up.
I'm glad you brought it too. Okay, it's a good conversation to have.
Because I see definitely where you're going with nostalgia, because I have my own problems with nostalgia too. I mean, to be fair, I fell victim to. Well, no, I didn't fall victim. Sort of, but like. I saw the first trailers for Spider-Man No Way Home. I was kind of like disgusted with how they were bringing back old like
was that Tobey Maguire?
Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield. I was kind of disgusted with how they were using nostalgia bait, but then the way they use the nostalgia to actually tell a good story, it works. But
I've actually heard that about Spider-Man, that it is actually decent.
And that is the same. That is the same thing for Top Gun Maverick. That is also a good example of like nostalgia done correctly. But
that is because, hot take here, Tom Cruise is incredibly talented and gifted at what he does, and he had such a hand in making that. That is why that works. He is original talent, and he just made a sequel. It's not like it's an adaptation of a game or something like that. He told a new story based off of an old one, and it works.
Well, then it can't be used as an example.
I mean, they do kind of borrow. The movie basically is like a Air Force. No, it's a naval pilot version of the plot for A New Hope, but that's neither here nor there. But I mean, yeah,
is that a Star Wars thing?
It's an adaptation.
Yeah, it's an adaptations thing. Yeah. So it could be an adaptation, but no, I mean, I definitely see where you're going with that one, because that is definitely. It's a sequel that people have been wanting for years. It is a true continuation of the original Top Gun story, and it is still faithful in that regards, and it builds on top of the lore that's already established. So I see where you're going with that one.
Yeah, I think just real quick, this quick thing, and then I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah.
To kind of recap my whole opinion on it, I think that there is some practical applications where there could be some exceptions, where there's some good things with the adaptations, but my overall principled stance against it is a hard no, for the reasons I've outlined.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me, especially on the point you just made, Shawn, about nostalgia, is I love nostalgia, but I don't view it in the way that you've explained it, the way that either of you have explained it.
Okay.
I like nostalgia in my own life, not in movies and TV shows. I also think that a big problem with the nostalgia you described, Shawn, is Marvel and DC. They're the problems in the biggest way by making this stuff just continue forever and ever with no real story.
But Star Wars is doing it.
But no,
Jurassic
it's not.
Park,
No, it's not.
everybody's doing
No,
it.
because Star Wars is doing it well. That's where
that's
I
not
differ.
what I'm hearing.
No. Andor is highly critically acclaimed.
Did you see
Book of Boba Fett?
No, I'm talking that and Obi-Wan.
They're gonna go into
but
their Star Wars rant.
Hey, I am also the Star Wars fan as well. But did you and I not see the same Disney trilogy as well?
Yeah, that was horrible.
Yeah, see, my point exactly.
But the TV shows have not. The Book of Boba Fett was really well done, but it just wasn't compelling.
Like you've got,
but Mandalorian was probably the best Star Wars to date, and that came out after the nostalgia has already existed for 30 years, 40 years, and then they had Andor, which I have not seen yet, but critically acclaimed, very well done. So far, best out of all the new little pop-up sequel.
It's also highly
prequel type things.
criticized too, though, isn't it?
Well, it's highly criticized and then very critically acclaimed. That's a good thing.
I mean, they did the same thing with Last Jedi and whatever.
Screw those 3 movies.
Okay.
But then you look at something like Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. I also have not seen that, so I can't speak to it as much. And I'm not defending it because of nostalgia. I'm defending it because of what I've seen online about how good it is. You know,
again, that's still kind of like the practical application of it. I'm just curious to know, do you have an objection to my principled stance against?
No, not at all. I'm with you. If that's what we're basing
games, folks.
If that's what we're basing it off of, then 100% I'm with you. Adaptations are wrong. Now, I think adaptations should exist, but I think it's been taken 10 times too far.
It's okay if I think that it would be my tune would be different, and if adaptations exist kind of as like its own genre, but now it seems like it is just everything that content consumers have is just nothing but adaptations or sequels, and that's all the art that we're producing right now.
Okay, so I agree. No adaptations. However, there are some adaptations that I have enjoyed, but I will say no to agree with you.
No.
Okay, so you're no. You're no. Okay, I'm not. Okay, so I can't be the deciding factor in this because
it's not like
You're
it's
not
a deciding
deciding.
factor.
If you say yes, you're still wrong because we both agreed. And if you say no, then we're all
I'm
right.
the guest, and also I edited this, so like I get to.
He can make himself look real good.
Yes. I mean, so Chris, for me, like, so adaptation. So like going back to what we're trying to talk about, this is ironic if you watch my podcast, by the way. So for me, like, there have been occasions where video game adaptations do work, and like they do, and they actually can pull it off. Like the last good one I saw, so like the new Mortal Kombat was okay, but there's some
talking
stuff.
about Mortal Kombat.
But
Never watched that. I don't even...
But no, like the new movie. I'm talking about the new movie.
But again,
Yeah, I still haven't
kind
seen
of like I'll try to keep you on
Like,
track here because it's the same thing for him.
But like, okay, you want to talk about nostalgia? I took my nostalgia out of it so I can like just see how it stood on its own.
You can't take
Strong.
your nostalgia out.
Very
of
strong
it.
man.
Yeah.
Really? Are you sure? Okay.
You can't
Nobody
just take
can.
it
I mean,
out,
it's
dude.
Yeah,
it's
sure
your
I can.
childhood. It's ingrained
Sure I
in
can.
you.
No.
Sure I can.
But again, you're saying the same thing that he did. There are certain practical applications where adaptations work, but in principle,
Necessarily speaking, though, it is very tricky for video games. I'll tell you.
What's the
I'll tell you.
answer?
Okay, hold on. So, I actually, believe it or not,
we're
I'll
bullying
say.
our editor.
I know.
I know.
Great.
Yeah, I'm editing this video, boys. So, okay, so ultimately, my answer is no. Asterisk, but only if the right people, only if it's adapted properly. I'll give you one good example of a good series that I saw back when I was in high school that actually worked. So there is a Street Fighter adaptation called Assassin's Fist. Actually,
Not familiar
Machinima.
with any of
Fighting
it.
games, dude.
It's-
Who's watching these movies?
Hey, no, it's a miniseries. So like,
Whatever.
but like, it's a miniseries. It was on YouTube for a long time. I would seek that out because it actually is a pretty good series on its own as well. Also, check out the original Mortal Kombat movie. You can also watch Lara Croft Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie. Those aren't too shabby either.
I've heard those are pretty good.
Yeah, and
for one reason or another.
Yeah.
heard that too.
Yeah. So the answer is no. Asterisk. Nice. With but only with a few exceptions. But so yes, my answer is no.
So what are your guys?
Dot.
So what are your guys' thoughts? Do you enjoy movie adaptations, game adaptations? Are you one way or the other? Are you both ways? Do you not care? Do you like all of it? Do you not even watch Street Fighter but vouch for it? Where are you at? Join us.
Again, I'm
next
editing
time.
this.
That's true.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We're super excited to have Eric, our editor, as a guest on it. Eric, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If you guys want to check out more of my editing work, just keep continuing watching Pog.
And also check out his YouTube channel. He's got a podcast. It's called Two Nerdskis in a Podcast. You can visit that. It'll have a link down in the description. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.